The amount of effort Disney put into their films can't be compared to any other studio. And we're not just talking about live-action films. You've probably seen the intricacy with which Disney creates its animated movies. It makes us wonder if there's any kind of secret formula they follow. Well, you're in luck because we'll discuss that in today's video. Stay tuned as we talk about Disney's animation Bible. First up, here's something you should know. If there's one thing we know about Disney, it's that they're never too shy to give their best when it comes to a project. That's probably why, even after almost a century, Walt Disney movies are still relevant. But there are some features that almost always go unnoticed. On top of the list is the rigorous process each movie goes through, especially the animated ones. Did you know that Disney sometimes creates their own software to perfect the animations? And not just this, they've got their own software for different body parts. Yeah, that's right. And get this, when it comes to hair, the studio has not one or two, but many software for different textures of hair. Now that's hard work. But this wasn't always the case. In fact, the very first films made by the studio, such as Snow White, which were released in 1937, had each frame drawn by hand. Shocking, isn't it? Well, all of this development didn't happen in just one night. So let's take a look at Disney's tried and tested rules that make up their animation Bible. Up next, the first rule we're going to discuss is the squash and stretch principle. Okay, so this is easily one of the most basic principles of animation, not just for Disney, but for other studios as well. This rule is used to give objects an illusion of flexibility, gravity, weight, and of course, mass. So basically, it tries to make the object or character look as lively as possible. And well, if it's still confusing to you, then we've got the perfect example for you. Imagine that you throw an elastic ball. When it falls, it's going to get elongated or compressed before it finally bounces back. If you ever happen to apply one of these rules in your work, just remember that while stretching, make sure your object gets narrower and longer, and as for squashing, it's going to be the opposite, shorter and wider. The next time you see a Disney film, just keep an eye open for these quips. Moving on to the next rule, let's talk about anticipation. Get this, anticipation in animated films doesn't have much to do with the climax of the film, but here it actually means getting the viewer ready for an upcoming action. Here's an example for you. So in the movies, when you see a person throwing a ball, they pull their arm backwards, right? Well, something similar happens when it comes to animating these movements. The only difference is that these movements are extremely exaggerated. If you watch a scene like this in a Disney film, you'll notice that the first pose is always very extreme, so it sort of creates an anticipation of what's going to happen next. That's extremely smart if you ask us. Now, the third rule on our list is staging. This is filmmaking 101. Have you noticed that whatever character is speaking on the scene, all attention seems to be on them, and everything else just kind of fades into the background? Well, this might seem like a given to you, but it's actually something that requires a lot of creativity and hard work. This technique is very important since it makes the purpose of a scene very clear. But how do you achieve it? Well, Disney's got an answer to that. You can get this by either placing your character in the center or by making sure that it's in line with 1/3 of the frame. Apart from this, you can use lighting, shadows, timing, and even elements in the surroundings to make sure that all eyes are on your main object. Here's another trick that Disney uses to make sure your eyes don't wander off. They incorporate a smart use of props and perspective that leads your eyes to the relevant object. That definitely must require a lot of thinking, and well, if we know Disney, they're not the ones to say no to a challenge. Following up, here's how Disney approaches an animation sequence. So when dealing with a sequence, the studio has two ways to move forward. One approach is called pose to pose, whereas the other one is straight ahead. These two techniques have their own specialties. You see, the straight ahead technique is actually best for realistic and fluid movements. What about the other one? Well, that approach is used for anything dramatic. Straight ahead can come in handy to show organic movements. Do you remember that one scene with the colors of the wind blowing through Pocahontas' hair? Well, that scene was made using this technique. And as for pose to pose, take Cinderella changing into her fancy magical ball gown, for example. It perfectly tells us how this approach is used to speed up or exaggerate movements in an animation. Next up, we've got the follow-through rule. This is actually a pretty interesting approach and is used when some parts of the animation drag behind while others continue to move. The best example of this would be hair flowing in the wind or clothes even. So basically, this rule focuses on the last part of the character that settles after a movement. If we're being honest, all of this sounds pretty complicated, and well, that's exactly what this rule is there for. Its main purpose is to give life to a complicated character in order to make it appear more realistic. So with follow-through, animators have to treat different textures accordingly and adjust their speed of movement so that it would add some flair to the scene rather than making it seem flat. Now, here's the next rule, overlapping. This one is pretty similar to follow-through, but is a bit more specific to the movements. If you see a running character on the screen, you'll notice that their arms and legs move at different speeds as compared to their head. This technique ends up adding depth to the entire scene, as the animators can use it to focus on different parts of the character. Let's move on to the slow in and slow out rule. Alright, this one, in our opinion, is pretty self-explanatory. This technique comes in handy when animators are focusing on fast-paced objects. For example, there's a person running. So what's going to happen is that they'll start at a slower pace and then speed up before slowing down again. Now, how can animators achieve these natural, smooth movements on screen? Well, the answer is pretty easy, by drawing more frames at the beginning and at the end. This would help the viewers focus more on their movements at the start and at the end, making everything look very graceful. Up next, let's talk about the arc. Okay, this rule might not be good news for those who started animating stuff because they just couldn't get through the sciences. If you plan on making your work good enough, you must know a bit of physics. At least, that's what Disney's animation Bible says. Following the laws of physics will help you mimic real-life movements, which will make the scene even more amazing. One rule that the animators use is following the arc, which basically can apply to natural action. For instance, if you move your hand, you'll notice that it moves in a rotation that follows gravity. Following up, what Disney movie would be complete without exaggeration? No matter how lifelike a Disney film might be, it'll have one crucial element incorporated in it which just fits perfectly with the overall theme of the studio: exaggeration. This technique adds a lot of charm to the overall sequences and can turn the film into something much more exciting. This rule is a must in all animated films that Disney produces, since it gives a theatrical effect that makes the overall sequence more captivating. The last rule on our list is appeal. Okay, this is another given when it comes to filmmaking. The audience likes to watch characters that resonate with them. That's why the studio always tries to be as realistic when it comes to characters so that they have an increased appeal. Through this technique, the animators not just focus on the features, but ensure that the movements of the characters, along with their overall behavior, is in line with what would be expected from them. For instance, in Moana, the animators observed the movements of Ollie and incorporated them in Moana's character in order to make it more relatable to their audience. Now, if that's not smart, we don't know what is. Similarly, in Encanto, the animators had to create a range of hairstyles and animate them in a way that would look real. So for that, they observed different hair textures and proceeded with their work accordingly. Well, going through all these rules definitely makes it very clear why Disney is still on top. They just don't stop innovating. That's a wrap for this video, folks. What do you think of these animation rules? Did we miss out on any techniques? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more awesome videos like this. See you in the next one with the latest updates.